This is The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. Whether you're a seasoned real estate expert, a first-time home buyer, or if you're simply passionate about hearing small business stories, this is the podcast for you. Join us as we dive deep into the world of real estate and beyond.
All right, well, welcome to episode 10 of The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. And I'm super excited about this one today because it's our first episode back in 2023, and I get to do it with my dad. And on top of that, it's our 10-year anniversary being in business. So it's kind of cool. Episode 10 years in business. Me and you, Dad. This is how it started.
Yep.
I thought it'd be fun today to talk about, in your obviously vast experience in real estate, and what are some of your best practices? And I'll share, having been doing this for 10 years now, my best business practices. So each of us will share 5. We're going to kind of go back and forth. And what I love about this, at least mine, I don't know yours, but these are business principles that can transcend into any business.
Sure, absolutely.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just good business practice. I mean, the way I look at
Right.
it, all of what I'm going to mention
Yeah.
is
And
awareness.
Yeah. And I think, not to toot our own horn, but we've done a really good job with our business, right? We've built a really solid foundation, and it's been so fun and awesome to do that. And it's fun. I think one of the coolest things is to see what you and I started and to see what it's grown to be and how it's impacted others' lives, not only the clients that we get to work with, but our team members too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Very
rewarding
for sure.
what we do.
And on top of that, when we started, it was just us. We did all of it.
Yep.
Now we have a team that they do a lot of it. And so even in our meeting before this, I'm asking them, how do we do this? Because they do so much of it, which is kind of cool too. So, all right. So business practice number 1, what do you got, Dad? What's your number 1?
I wrote just down some thoughts, and one of them is not to count your eggs before they hatch. Basically saying that, in my experience, that anything could happen in a transaction to make it fall apart. Even we had one a couple of years ago, right when the pandemic hit, where the buyer canceled the day of recording and he forfeited his deposit over to the seller, didn't even argue it. I had one 40 years ago, where the husband died. He was a husband and wife buying a house, and the husband died like 2 days before the close of escrow. And so that transaction fell apart. So
I was just in a listing appointment this morning, and I was talking to the seller about that very thing, that so many agents, because they don't do a lot of business, they're super motivated by that closing because that's their paycheck, and maybe their only paycheck for a while. And when you operate in business that way, where that's what's motivating you, it changes how you represent the client.
Absolutely. The stress level is significantly different. It's not a good place to come from in terms of representing a client's interest.
For sure. It's never done until it's done.
Right.
We've said that to clients too, so that's a good one. Okay, let me go.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll go. My first best business practice, which is super applicable to me and you, is I think you should have a mentor. When you're going about business, especially in real estate, but in anything, having a mentor who's gone before you that can show you the ways, I think is going to help avoid so many of the pitfalls and help you get to that place of success a lot faster. I know you did that for me in telling me, this is what you should do. This is how you should do it, and do it. And it was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I feel like I got to jump light years ahead. You did. Because of that.
Right.
And then also for me, you were a really great encouragement. And then obviously having other mentors along the way too, they were always a great encouragement to me to keep going when it's tough.
Yeah, push on through.
And you've had mentors.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and they've helped me quite a bit over the years in terms of refining the approach I take in managing my business. So, yes.
Yeah, have a mentor.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Number 2.
Number 2 is how do I phrase this? In my 43 years of selling houses, the one constant, as you know, is that every seller I've ever met wants every dime out of their house. They don't want to leave anything behind. And yet, in the last few years, we've seen how they can be manipulated into taking less than what they can rightfully get for their property. And that's been perplexing to me as to how can that be done. And the best explanation I can give is that they are manipulated into taking less than what they can get, because there are companies out there that buy homes directly from the owners, and they promise them top a dollar and a smooth transaction. And it generally is a smooth transaction, but they're not completely forthright in terms of what that seller can get for their property.
For sure. I think those sellers, and or people in general are trading convenience for the dollar, but what they don't realize is how much of the dollar they're giving away for that convenience. And had they fully known, which is why there's been lawsuits around this now, because what they'll call as fair market value, sometimes it's not. And in full disclosure, sometimes we're seeing them overpay too.
Right. Well, because the market has completely shifted now. So now it's coming back to bite them in that they can't. I was just looking at one today that I showed that's at $513,000, but they paid $617 9 months ago for the house. So, good for them.
That's tough. Good for that seller.
It stinks how they've done business. I'm not mentioning any companies, but in my opinion, it stinks what they've done over the last few years.
Just to give some stats, and I wish I had that with me, in the market update class I was at yesterday that our office puts on, all of those companies are all down in their numbers, but one of the numbers that they're up in is the amount of canceleds and expireds that they have with one particular company. And I thought that was super interesting, because specifically with that company and the program that they promote is that they'll sell your home in a certain amount of time. Right. And with the market having changed, that's not happening anymore. And so these sellers are fed up and they're canceling, which is fantastic for us it's fantastic for us because it's come back home, right? Where you get
full circle.
Right? You get full service, you get a trusted advisor that's going to look out for your best interest and only your best interest. And that's the hard part, where it kind of dumbfounds me with these sellers, is don't they see that these companies are in it for themselves to make a profit? And especially when they turn around and put your home back on the market, how do they not see that? But I think it comes back to just being ignorant to really how much are they giving up for that convenience. I don't think they realize.
That's what I believe.
Okay.
You're up.
My number 2 is always be learning. I think you should always, in your profession, be learning and looking to get better and to improve on your skills and learn new tricks of the trade. One of the things that I love is when I'm at conferences or classes is hearing one or two, like you say, pearls or nuggets that I can hear and get inspired by and say, I'm going to go take and put that into practice in my business, right? Also, one of my goals this year is I want to take advantage of as much learning as I possibly can. I don't have a business coach this year, and that was intentional because I wanted to hear from a variety of different experts, not just one company's opinion, and to take from that what I could to implement into our business, because I find that personally to be really inspiring. Some of it works well, some of it doesn't, but that's how we learn and get better. So I think in any business, you should always be learning and looking to be better.
Well, and along that, I used to go to 3-day seminars, in other parts of the country. And in the early days, I used to set my expectations too high that I would just get a wealth of knowledge. And many times, while I got a lot of information, it wasn't, in my opinion, it didn't seem to be worth the expense of going. But it wasn't until I came to the decision to only seek 3 or 4 or 5 different, as I call them, pearls from a seminar that are truly profound in terms of what I do, then it became worth the travel and the expense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What are your expectations?
Right.
But so I think that's the fault that so many people make, is they get to a place where they're, okay, I know it all, and they just stop trying to learn and be better. And we can always be better. So that's my number 2. Always be learning.
I love that what I wrote here is always remember you are under a microscope. And we've talked about this. Mm-hmm. We've talked about all these things. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'm bringing it up again. And what I'm trying to communicate here is that the clients, whether it's a buyer or a seller, are watching everything that we do. And while we may, let's say, make a mistake or do something not up to the complete expectation of what was expected, while that may be a small deal to us, many times that's a big deal to the client. So it's just really important that we as business people, when we're dealing with the public and the public is paying us for a service, we have to understand that everything that we do is being watched very carefully. And so you've got to be at your best at all times.
Yeah. I think a way to do that, because at the end of the day, every client's different.
Yes.
And they come into it with different expectations, different communication styles, different needs and hot buttons. And so part of initially that process for me is finding out who they are, how do they want to be communicated with, so that I can rise above their expectations, right?
Beautiful.
Because it's super hard. I'm the type of person where I don't want a lot of info. Just get to the point, give it to me straight, and let's move on. And others really want all those details and they want to break it down. And so learning your client so that you can serve them best, I think will help avoid that. But I agree with you. I mean, having done this for 10 years, unfortunately, we've had some times where we've made mistakes and you have to learn from it. And to your point, stuff that to us may seem like no big deal can be a really big deal.
Right.
I remember, again, a long time ago, learning the hard way, explaining to a seller that the buyer was paying all the closing costs. That was the language I used. And if you've been doing this for a while, you already know that that's not the right language, because as a seller, they're thinking, great, they're paying all the closing costs. They're paying mine too. And that's not how that works, right? A buyer, what I meant to say was the buyer's paying all their own closing costs. That was a really expensive lesson to learn. So not taking things for granted or assuming they know. Because and when they, to your point, are, have these expectations on us, sometimes those mistakes don't go over very well. But I owned it, for the record. I owned it and I made it right, because that was my bad.
Your bad.
My bad.
Yeah, I've always said that we have to pay for our mistakes. If we represent something that is going to cost, there's a dollar figure to it, we have to own it and pay it and learn from it. So.
And never assume that they know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is it your turn or my turn?
It's my turn. That was yours.
Oh.
All right. Mine is not to focus on the naysayers. That's my next tip in business. I've seen that a lot, that as we've continued to grow over the years, we've had a lot of haters. And it's because they're focused on us when they should be focused on their own business. And I love that analogy of what you focus on is where you go. And so if my trajectory is on the road ahead and how to be successful and what my goals are, while there could be things going on in the distance, I'm so focused that it doesn't interfere, right, with my pathway. But the moment I take my focus off of that and I start getting distracted by what these naysayers or haters are saying, well, where do I naturally go? Yeah. And unfortunately, that's just a part of doing well in business, is there's going to be people that are going to be jealous. They're not going to like that. And you got to keep moving forward regardless and wish them well. That's the thing I think that's funny to me is I've always been happy for other realtors and their success, and there's plenty of business to go around.
Right.
And we also all can do it differently too, and that's okay too. So when I've worked with other agents that have had that same mindset, it's been huge. And it's just been a fun
Absolutely.
experience, but
Right.
don't focus on the naysayers.
There you go. Okay, I'm up. I wrote, do exactly what you say you are going to do. That may kind of group in with the previous one, but bottom line is pay attention to everything that you represent out there, because again, they're paying attention to what you're saying, and you've got to follow through with every little detail. You just can't overlook anything, because then it could very likely come back to bite you. So
Have you ever had a situation, Dad, where
I've been bitten.
I shouldn't ask, have you? I should say when.
No, I think when you were talking a few minutes ago about the closing cost one, I remember one 40 years ago where the seller was paying, let's say, I don't even know, it was in the thousands, $3,000 or $4,000 worth of the buyer's closing cost. They were crediting the buyer, let's say $4,000 for closing costs. And the buyer went in and signed their loan docs. We closed the deal. I met them at their new house, gave them the keys, and they asked where their check was. And I said, what check? And they said the $4,000 that the seller was crediting us. And I had to explain to them that $4,000 indeed was paid to them, but it was deducted from their closing cost. So they brought in $4,000 less.
Yeah.
In their minds, though, they were expecting $4,000 check at the close of escrow. And even though what I said made sense, it was devastating for them. I felt horrible, and I thought I lost that customer, but lo and behold, 2 or 3 years later, they had me come and sell their house. So,
Well, that's
but
good.
at that time,
Yeah.
it was devastating.
That's so hard though too, because that's their assumption
Right.
and full disclosure.
Exactly right.
But yet at the same, it's like, how much detail do you really get into?
That's right.
It's so hard.
That's right.
And that's
And
the
I
hardest part.
blame myself partly because obviously I didn't do a good enough job explaining that it would come off of their, they would bring in 4,000 less. And then when in California where I sold real estate, it was an escrow officer, where the escrow officer maybe didn't do a good job showing on the accounting that they
Yes.
indeed did get that 4,000, you know? So
Yeah.
it
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm explaining or re-explaining, but I'd much rather be safe than sorry
Right.
and have a situation like that.
Right.
Especially when it comes to people's money.
Right.
I'm so sensitive to that. I always send out the settlement statement before they go to the closing table so that they see it ahead of time, so that there aren't any surprises and they fully understand. And sometimes there are errors that we have to correct, right? And that's why we look at that and audit that so closely.
Yes.
But
yes.
those, can be devastating. And because we care so much, whether it's your fault or not, you feel horrible
Right.
for them.
Right.
Okay, my next one, my number 4, is to get good at what you do. In any business, I think you should want to be the absolute best at it, and you should hone your craft and really fine tune so that you can be the absolute best, and not take that for granted. And I think, especially in the real estate world, there are so many options out there. And, we've said this, that anybody can do the 3 Ps. They can put the sign in the yard, put your home in MLS, and pray that it sells, right? My daughter could do that, right? But that is not what yes, on paper maybe, but there's so much more that goes into doing a good job. And,
Right.
and with our industry, doing a good job, that difference between being good and really good is typically translates into thousands and thousands of dollars for that buyer or that seller, in terms of how much money they get to pocket when they sell, or for a buyer, how much money they save on that purchase.
Right.
A lot of money.
Right.
So I think you have to be really, really good at what you do,
Absolutely.
and that'll set you apart.
There you go. My last one is, I was a little uncomfortable writing this one, or
Okay.
thinking I'm going to talk about this, but people are very unpredictable.
Yes.
And I just had an experience recently, where
Oh.
I lost a customer over the most ridiculous things, and it absolutely had nothing to do with me, zero to do with me. But yet,
But I think it goes back to, we're dealing with the public.
yes,
and people are so different. You
Yes.
know, I remember one a long time ago. This husband and wife was referred to me by two different people that didn't even know each other. And I got them multiple, and this was years and years ago. And probably as I start to tell the story, you'll remember who I'm talking about. Years and years ago. And I got them multiple offers the first weekend, which at the time was not a common practice. And they were not happy. And I was so confused. And it ended up, we're just totally not communicating well and totally on opposite pages. I was so lost. And that's when I said, you know what, I'm going to step out and you're going to work with them, Dad. And you had a fine experience.
That's right. I remember
It
that
was
now.
so odd to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think you just have to, at the end of the day, sometimes we're not always going to work well. And I had that recently too, where I knew that very early on that me and this gentleman were not going to work well together. And I pulled myself out of that situation. And thank goodness I did.
Right. Right.
So yeah, but it's hard when because what we do, we care so much, we
Right.
get so personal, and
Right.
in certain situations, we're really friends with these people.
Yes.
And then to have them turn like that is
Yes,
really
yes.
devastating.
Well, and also just in case this does get played out there, so there's a little bit more clarity to what I was alluding to. The problem started because I, to this day, feel that his property was worth significantly less than what he thought it was worth, given the market conditions we're in. If this was a market of a year ago or 2 years ago, then yes, I would have totally agree with him that we can get his number or even more. But because my number was so much different than his, that's what turned everything. But yet prior to that, him and I were friends. It just kind of blew me away at
Yeah.
the change.
Well, and I think what I think is sad about that is it would have been a much different situation had he just said, hey,
Right.
we're not on the same page,
Right.
but we can still be friends.
Of course.
But it became a
Right.
completely different thing,
Right.
which, you know,
And I had told you that I was, if I was not willing to list it at his
Right.
price, and I was worried about how am I going to tell him,
yes.
you know. So,
Well, that's a funny thing. And that goes to my other situation of people don't realize it's a two-way street.
Right.
And especially now, again, doing this for 10 years, I feel like I have enough experience that I can see where things are going to go. And there's a big part of me again this morning where I wasn't willing to compromise on certain things. And I'm much more willing to walk away from business than to compromise on our process, on all of those things that help make us successful. Because if we're not in agreement on that, then it's best that we don't work together. I'd rather go spend my time and energy in someone that does see the value and is on the same page with me and trusts me implicitly.
you said being successful. It's more than just being successful. It's about doing the best job for that client.
sure.
That translates into success.
For
but
sure.
At the end of the day, your objective is to do the absolute best you can for that client. You're the
Yes.
expert. And so when there's a lack of meeting of the minds, then, you know, you got to take a stand, unfortunately.
Yeah,
At
but
times
for
that
my
doesn't
peace
go
of
well.
mind.
Yes, right.
Because I've had those where I haven't.
Right.
And you see how it plays out, and it's so much more
Right.
stress than it's
It
worth.
is. It is absolutely not worth it.
Yeah, I'd much rather pour into
Beautiful,
right.
harmonizing
Yeah,
relationships where they recognize your value.
for sure, and appreciate it. Okay. My last of my top 5 best business practices is to have a plan, set some goals for your business.
nice.
And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier of knowing where you're going and where you're headed. And if you don't know where you're headed, you're going to kind of flounder. And I think having a goal and a plan for me holds me accountable. It keeps me going. So much of our business, Dad, I mean, this just totally goes to what we were just talking about it's just a mindset, right? Having a little bit of a tough, thick skin and a tough mindset to weather the storm, to have the hard conversations sometimes, to being willing to walk away from somebody. And when you know where you're headed, then it makes it much easier to do that when otherwise you don't. And we see this with new agents all the time, right? Where they're so desperate for business, they'll work with anybody, even if that person right off the bat isn't following what they need to be doing.
Right.
And they go out and spin their wheels, show them houses, only to have them get burned and go write an
Right.
offer with someone else.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to learn the hard way. We've had agents that have learned the hard way. But I think if you have a plan, have those goals, it'll keep you on the right path and keep you motivated. When we first started and we would go out door knocking and I would be discouraged or want to give up or hot or thirsty or whatever, my thing was, let me just talk to one person. And that was what kept me going, right? It was just the idea of that one person. Then we talked to the one person. So
yeah, you could chop the goal up into small segments, and it's much more achievable. And then you accomplish that first small segment, and then it's easier to go and get that second one. And yeah, I get it.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add, Dad?
Nope. Nope. Real estate's an interesting business, very rewarding. It's a beautiful career.
Yes, it is.
But it can be tough, you know.
And again, what realtors forget is they truly have a small business.
Yeah.
And they have to run it accordingly.
Right.
There's so much that goes into it. Well, it's been fun. 10 years with you, Dad. I can't believe that.
Yep.
It's been 10 years. I was looking at some old photos and my kids were so little back then. But I'm super excited to see what the next 10 have for us, which would be 20 in total. But yeah, hopefully those tips were helpful. I think they applied to anybody in business.
Sure.
And it was fun chatting with you.
It's always a joy.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks for listening to The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the Home Selling Team on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify to stay up to date with our podcast.